Legacy can be a messy, complicated thing. It can empower us, giving us the courage to take the first steps of a grander journey, but it can also trap us and leave us with a responsibility that we never asked for. At some point in life, we're all confronted with the choice to hold on to the past or to take our own path forward, and it's through these struggles of legacy and self-discovery that we start to find out who we really are. In September of 2002, the up-and-coming game studio Sucker Punch released Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, which followed the titular young thief on a mission to steal back his family's most prized possession from a gang of notorious supercriminals. Even in the shadow of PlayStation mainstays like Ratchet & Clank and Jak and Daxter, Sly's modest success was a pivotal moment in Sucker Punch's history, showcasing their deftness at merging story and style, and gaining just enough of a following to greenlight a sequel. While some parts of the game were more fully realized than others, Sly managed to forge a legacy of its own, giving its creators their first major foothold in the gaming industry. But it was also something that Sucker Punch wanted to iterate on, using everything they'd learned to fully realize the potential behind their characters, concepts, and story. This passion would give rise to the 2004 sequel Band of Thieves, a game that takes its mechanics and presentation to the fullest and lays the groundwork for a richer, more mature story. Sly had given Sucker Punch their first real taste of success, but now they had the chance to build something truly spectacular. And build they did. In plain terms, the first Sly Cooper was not an overnight success. The game had a healthy following, but its release at the height of the PlayStation 2's platformer craze in 2002 put Sucker Punch squarely in competition with bigger studios like Insomniac and Naughty Dog, each of whom had their own well-established mascots. But what Sly lacked in terms of its competitors' resources, it more than made up with through its style. Sly's character made an immediate impression with critics, and the game continued to gain steam through its visuals and presentation, eventually outperforming the team's goal of 1 million sales and putting them on the path to a sequel, with a few key improvements on their mind.
The people at Sony helped us really understand how far we had to push ourselves,
recounts producer Brian Fleming.
When we were finished with Sly 1, we were really pleased with how well the game was received artistically. We really wanted to build off of that and try to address the sophistication of the gameplay and the level of diversity in the game, instead of just going down a course and getting a key.
While style had been Sly's big draw, some elements definitely still needed refining. The game's animated aesthetics didn't really translate from its concept art, with cutscenes coming off as too bright and sharp, and the in-game engine a bit muted and unrefined. You got the impression of what each character was supposed to be, but there was definitely a bit of compromise between Dev Madan's detailed line work and what was achievable inside the game's engine and models. The game's design was also firmly rooted in platforming, downplaying stealth and thievery in favor of more linear obstacle course-based levels and, let's just say, less than thrilling minigames. Do you know what whacking 50 chickens has to do with stealing an old book back? Yeah, me neither. Luckily, Sly's success allowed the company to grow, giving old and new team members more specialized roles in the production. Lead designer Nate Fox took on an additional role as the game's writer, dialing in the game's new tone with an even stronger focus on classic heist movies like The Italian Job and Ocean's 11. Dev Madan stayed on as art director to help finalize this new direction, designing characters and locales that played off of classic heist cinema, and concept artists Travis and Jordan Kodzibu were given control over animated cutscenes, bringing a sleeker, softer aesthetic more in line with Sly's comic book influences. These new aesthetics even transfer to the in-game graphics, with texture artists like Karen Yamagiwa and Hokyo Lim emulating classic cartoon visuals to have characters pop against environments.
Everyone is injecting something through the pipeline,
muses art director Dev Madan.
There is a rough outline of where we want the story of the game to go, and what we want to achieve in the level before a world gets started. Our designers are artists who came up as environmental modelers, so they build their levels with sensitivity to camera issues, layout, and the aesthetic of each world. The look for the game didn't really stray too far from the original production paintings. From the very onset, we wanted to make you feel like you were interacting with a cartoon.
To top it all off, Peter McConnell of Psychonauts and Grim Fandango fame stepped in as the game's new composer, bringing a suave, sophisticated energy to the game's soundtrack, way more fitting with Sly's personality if you ask me. This new take also meant a whole new approach to level design, with the gang's adventures unfolding over a series of massive open worlds. As such, Chris Zimmerman and the programming team rewrote the game's engine to better fit the PS2's technology, allowing for improved visuals and heightened interactivity with each setting. No surprise then that this led to some of the densest ecosystems the team had ever built, with trains roaring across landscapes, environmental stages marking shifts in the story, and denser guards and wildlife adding just enough chaos to make it even more fun.
We just look for scenarios that you get to feel like you're participating in this kind of blown off the doors heist that reflects the feeling you get in movies. Anything that makes you feel like a thief.
States Nate Fox.
Certain setups, certain kind of emotional connections make you feel like you're watching from the shadows. Like you're empowered to do things and have no one know that you're doing them. A lot of references helped us make the game, like Batman the Animated Series was huge. That sort of film noir style that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek because it's over the top. It came through in the first game and we're just doubling down on it.
In place of linear obstacle courses dotted with platforming set pieces, each setting is built more like a jungle gym, with elements like coins, clue bottles, and valuable items encouraging players to venture off the beaten path and sink deeper into the persona of a master thief. Or rather, thieves. Early on in the game's development, the team began pitching the idea of playing as the entire Cooper Gang, with each character playing parts in a classic Hollywood-style caper. Kevin Miller's Sly, being the title character, still gets the most focus, but his role as a point man is now set against Matt Olson's Bentley and Chris Murphy's Murray, who have shed their roles as sidekicks and taken on the roles of the team's brains and brawn in the field. It's a pitch-perfect reinvention of everything seen in the first game, and lends a lot of weight to this next chapter in Sly's story. Just like Sucker Punch, the gang aren't the same scrappy band of kids we saw before. This time, they're a team operating at the top of their game. A bona fide band of thieves. Picking up 2 years after the events of Sly 1, Sly 2's intro follows a number of familiar beats, with the gang staging a daring break-in to capture the remains of the villain Clockwork. However, as the player moves through the prologue, this familiarity starts to give way in interesting ways, the first of which being the sheer scope of everything. While the previous game gave great impressions of larger locales, the bustling streets and denser security of the Cairo Museum make a much more effective statement. After all, what's the fun of stealing something if you're not sneaking past anyone to do it? Each stage of the prologue also reintroduces a member of the gang, letting the players see this new dynamic in action. It's pretty fun. Naturally, the fun can't last forever, and the player comes face to face with Sly's on-again off-again foil Inspector Fox, as well as newcomer Constable Neela, who's way more complicated than she lets on, even giving the gang their first major lead. From here, Sly 2's story acts as both a refinement and reinvention of what came before. In place of the isolated warlord-esque fiendish five, the Claw Gang are positioned as members of high society, using their status and wealth to hide their nefarious operations. It's a brilliant way to implement the game's core concept, with each episode charting Sly, Bentley, and Murray's parts in massive heists pulled off right under the noses of the general public. Each episode follows a 3-act structure bookended by the classic animated cutscenes, further broken up by ocean-style slideshows that break down the plan as it unfolds in real time. There's a real effort to showcase the scope of each heist, with missions exploring Sly's new focus on precise stealth and close-up activity, Bentley's tech and bombs, and Murray's approach, which is, appropriately, very direct. While the game's first level is treated as business as usual, even bringing us back to the gang's old stomping grounds in Paris, Sly 2 uses these newly expanded dynamics to make its core story more reactive from chapter to chapter. Rajan's lavish palace plays off of classic heist tropes, masking his corruption with wealth and majesty, but his embarrassment at the hands of the gang leads to a grimmer, creepier second stage, building off of his own descent. Kinda like that phrase, "don't poke the tiger," but, you know, literally. Stalking Rajan into the jungle, the gang start to take serious risks, getting a bit too close for comfort and making dubious alliances to take him down once and for all, one of which they end up paying for. Across the game's first 3 chapters, Neela's involvement is carefully curated, setting her up as a rival love interest to the staunchly black and white Carmelita. There's a real sense of compatibility built between her and Sly, helped by her own willingness to break the rules and get a solution for both sides. Something that really hurts when the player realizes she's been playing them this whole time.
Neela, now!
Sorry.
What are you doing? Oh! Sly!
While the player still gets a bit of catharsis through a battle with Rajan, Sly, Murray, and Carmelita's arrests are set perfectly against the reveal of corruption inside Interpol, the ultimate subversion that leaves Bentley, and by extension the player, more vulnerable than ever. It's the first of many rug pulls throughout the game, and feeds perfectly into the larger coming-of-age story for Sly and the gang, as their perspective on themselves and the world around them starts rapidly changing, pulling them out of their comfort zones. Building on the effective, if minimal, character arcs of the previous game, Sly 2's second act is all about highlighting the bonds these 3 have for one another, with Bentley single-handedly breaking his friends out of their worst nightmare, a gothic prison in Prague, watched over by the Contessa, an Interpol bigwig with secret ties to the Claw Gang. The game's Batman animated influences are on full display here, heightening Prague's towers and castles into the game's most imposing setting, really driving home what Bentley has to overcome to get his friends back. It's also, in this day and age, a pretty brilliant swipe at the prison industrial complex, framing Contessa's compound as a place built on draconian punishment rather than rehabilitation. Take note, kids, you're never too young to learn about the failings of the justice system. While most of the episode is spent showing Bentley overcoming these horrors through his clever use of hacking and gadgetry, it's also a deep dive into his character. Bentley didn't get much to do in Sly 1, with the few lines of dialogue he had either given to exposition or a lack of regard for his friend's safety.
I've calculated the trajectory of these rockets and I'm 99% sure you'll be able to ride them all the way to the top of that statue before they explode.
What about that other 1%?
Well, in that case, Sly, you will be blown to bits. But the experience will no doubt be spectacular.
Here, though, Bentley's devotion to his friends is set perfectly against the colder, calculating mind of the Contessa, who uses her gifts to steal and exploit everyone around her. It's an effective way of showing how far Bentley's come, using his own talents to turn the parts of the prison against each other, repurposing a train to free Sly, powered to public transit by the way, and hacking into the prison to free Murray. From here, the plot takes a bit of an upswing, pitting the newly reunited team against the crumbling Claw Gang as Neela's fight with the Contessa turns Prague into a war zone. In a nice reversal of the previous chapter, Prague's Part 2 sees the gang reclaiming their agency, using the chaos to their advantage, and finally, enacting some justice on their tormentor. But instead of going back to business as usual, the player is treated to another lasting shift in the story, with Carmelita going on the run with the gang, building the understanding between them, if only a little. By now, the larger story of the game is starting to take shape. This isn't just another adventure, but a challenge to everything we thought we had learned in the previous game, deepening the bonds between our characters and letting us know exactly what's at stake. The growing tension between the family Sly never knew and the one he found on his own. After the heaviness of the midpoint, the plot winds down to something quieter, taking the gang out to the icy wastes of Nineveh Bay in search of shipping magnate Jean Bassan, who's used his clockwork parts to power a fleet of freight trains. A lumberjack frozen in the 1850s and thought out later Captain America style, Bassan is cleverly used to represent the instinct to cling to the old ways of thinking, when Sly's story and the world around it were simpler. Of course, times change, and everything can shift in an instant, something the next 2-part chapter is quick to remind us. While Canada is used to de-escalate the stress of the game's midpoint, it also highlights just how chaotic everything's gotten, with the classic heist structure giving way to a more frantic set of train robberies as the team turns the wilderness into an advantage. Sly's skill set is broadened to adapt to the rockier terrain, thanks to the new ice hooks and paraglider, but the environment is also noticeably more hostile, complete with bears, a roving Carmelita, and everybody's formerly favorite constable who's now become a fully crazed mercenary.
Hey Cooper! Thought I might find you here. Just can't stay away from these clockwork parks, can you?
Oh, I just do it to meet exciting ladies like yourself.
This part 1 ends on a fairly high beat, with the gang riding high on their success and driving Bassan deeper into the Nunavut wilderness. And unfortunately, this is also the part where their luck finally starts to catch up with them. With a ticking clock set at the beginning of the stage, the gang's plans become more and more spur of the moment until, before you know it, you're trying to outcheat a cheater through a series of off-brand Olympics. It does not go well.
Wait a second. You aren't the judges I hired.
It's here where we get the game's second, devastating reversal, as Bentley is forced to go head-to-head with this absolute mountain of a boss, using the gang and parts of a lumber mill to take Bassan to task. And while it's an incredible payoff to the arc seated back in Prague, we're left in a desperate state, with all of the clockwork parts now in the hands of the enemy. Despite our best efforts, Clockwork's return is all but guaranteed. Our obsession with the past now looms over our future. By the time we get to SLY 2's finale, a theme has started to crystallize. The gang's previous adventures set them up against a band of criminal warlords in their prime, lending a sense of triumph to our mission to steal back the Thievius Raccoonus. And while that still holds true here, SLY 2's villains serve as a reflection on SLY himself, driven to secure their legacy at any cost. The somber finale to the Canada chapter is the perfect lead-in to this emotional climax, lingering on each member of the gang as they stew in their failure. There's a real sense of desperation and alienation that hangs over the game's last act, driven home by its alien setting. A massive airship hurtling through the sky towards Paris. This slow burn finally boils over through one final recon mission, which swiftly undercuts the player as SLY's desperate actions end up leading to Clockwork's reassembly, followed by a lengthy, patronizing villain speech, and, for good measure, one final betrayal at the hands of Neela.
This is preposterous! You're my protege, not the next candidate for my immortality. I demand you exit the Clockwork frame or...
The commentary is palpable here. Driven by her obsessions, Neela becomes everything SLY fears about himself, with her greed slowly turning her into the monster that's hunted the Cooper family for generations. It's all a vicious cycle, one that SLY and his gang have only perpetrated in their attempts to kill Clockwork once and for all. With the gang's final objective brought into focus, the rest of the stage becomes a showcase for the bonds built across the game. Missions pair up members to show how their skills complement one another, old mechanics get one more loving send-off, and in a sign of her own development across the game, Carmelita once again offers her help to take down the bigger threat. There's an unsettling familiarity that permeates the final battle with Neela, with each stage of the fight making deliberate callbacks to SLY's last fight with Clockwork, down to the last desperate scrap in a wrecked Paris, bringing the player full circle with where they began. Unfortunately, we don't get the same heroic triumph we did last time.
Let's get out of here! She's about to explode! Ah!
What? Bentley! I'll save you!
Pick me up! I can't walk!
Come on, SLY, let's get out of here!
While Clockwork is eventually beaten for good, the player is also left with the realization that SLY's obsession with legacy has marked his friends forever, something that he finally acknowledges by turning himself in. It's in this quiet epilogue that we finally see the mask slip, as SLY lets go of his reputation and makes the one meaningful connection he's been running from all this time. Of course, the ties we've built with our friends aren't easily broken, and the player gets one last bit of catharsis as SLY vanishes into the night. But even then, there's something much bigger at play that we're left to sit with as the game's final message appears on screen. Things have changed, and try as we might, we'll never be able to change them back. It's messy, it's painful, but it's a part of life. Band of Thieves is far more than just a good sequel. It's a step towards a grander story for its characters and what they represent. From a certain point of view, SLY's story is also the story of Sucker Punch, a scrappy band of up-and-comers who join together in the pursuit of something greater. Even outside of its countless improvements, presentation, and the company history that enriches it, there's something universal about SLY 2 that keeps me coming back all these years later. It's natural to cherish what was, but sooner or later, we all have a choice to make. To hold on to a memory that has come and gone, or to find a new dream, and take the first steps towards discovering who we really want to be. Thanks for checking out my latest video, and the second, or technically third part in my ongoing series about the history of one of my favorite groups of creators. I've always been fascinated with the story of Sucker Punch, and I'd argue SLY 2 is when they really started to prove themselves as one of PlayStation's strongest developers. I've said before that the SLY series were some of the first games that I ever played, and since then, I've come back to them over and over again with a newfound appreciation, both for what was achieved then and where Sucker Punch is as a company now. If you like this video, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Every little bit helps the channel out a lot. I'd also like to give a special thanks to The Comics Cave, Dom DeFelice, Justin Kilgore, Kirk Ireland, and my patrons, who are helping me to grow this channel and continue doing what I love, and hopefully what you love too. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay true to your own little band of thieves.